everyone, I'm back again. My name is Rowan Folds, and I read the book by Carmen Simon called Impossible to Ignore: Creating Memorable Content to Influence Decisions. Chapter 1: Why Memory Matters in Decision Making. So if our brain were an engine, its fuel would be memory. When we choose an action, we rely on memory to predict rewards to guide our behavior in 3 ways. One of the 3 ways is the reflexive way, subconsciously altering actions due to biological reflexes, such as touching a hot stove, and your reflexes just know not to do that because you'll pull your hand away super fast. The second way is a habitual way, repeating rewarded actions. So this is sort of a trial and error. Once you do something and you see the outcome of that, you're either going to repeat that because it was a good outcome, or you're not going to repeat it because it wasn't a good outcome. And the third way is a goal-oriented way, anticipating outcomes based on past experiences. In this way, you're allowed to make some decisions because since it's a goal-oriented way, you may look at your past for the ideas of what you're going to do, but you're also able to alter your decision and change your actions based on your idea of what could predict the best outcome for your goal. To be on people's minds, you must be in their goals, reflexes, or habits. To do this, you have to think about what these are according to your audience. For example, 19th century math took a lot of trial and error. So this would be the habitual way of thinking. Within the book, he describes about a museum that is based on a small island, and it's basically the only thing on this island, and this guy just made his home there into this giant cool museum, and just the way he described it is though the artifacts that were in this museum were pretty simple but also rather extraordinary because this museum was created in the middle of nowhere. Everyone's been pretty curious to go see it, and this museum, because of the way it's set up, different from other museums, it's very interactive and you can walk through it. There's also a nude walkthrough at night if you'd prefer that. The way that they integrate everybody into this, it just brings people in because they are interactive with the museum. In every place that they stop, they spent more time there compared to times that other people have spent at other museums looking at other artifacts. What matters most is what happens next. People need memory to predict the next move. They're constantly thinking of the past for future reference. To be able to get into people's minds, you must plug into their reflexes, habits, and their goals. Chapter 2: A Business Approach to Memory. 3 Steps to Influence Memory and Decisions. When people think about the future, they take the imagery from the past and they place themselves there in their mind in the future, but take into account all the imagery that they have in their head is from what they've seen in the past. Along with goals, good intentions to complete them are important, but if the reward isn't strong enough in the end, they might not be willing to begin this goal, this new goal that they're trying to implement into their lives, into their habits, or it just might not be, it's not giving them enough to be able to commit themselves to this. Prospective memory. Future memory. Memory of making a future intention. When people think prospectively, they follow these 3 steps. The first of these 3 steps is going to be noticing cues. So when you want to make a future intention and you have intentions to go through with something in the future, you first have to notice a cue that will remind you to complete this. It might be going to the store and seeing something that's related. Say you need milk and you see cheese. Cheese comes from milk. Oh, it's a cue. Maybe, possibly, if the cue is strong enough, that it will remind you that you needed milk. When you saw that cheese, you'd be doing the second step, which is searching your memory for the link. And when you realize that dairy, milk, cheese, all together, it's going to cue you to go get that milk. And if something is rewarding enough, execute. Get it. So, if it's strong enough to remind you, then you're going to complete this action. All of these are connected to the brain's tendency to seek rewards and avoid punishment. To be impossible to ignore, we must learn how to create cues, bringing important memories to the audience's attention and help listeners execute on these intentions at a future point. How cues help memory. They serve as a signal that something must be done. When you see that cue, you're going to know that you have to complete what you had previously thought about. For cues to work, the person's going to have to care about what they're doing. If they don't, they're most likely going to forget about it. If a cue is rewarding enough, they're definitely not going to forget about it. They may, although, forget about it. But if it's something they're looking forward to and something exciting that they want in their life, they're most likely not going to forget about it. And this is going to be the difference of free recall and cue recall. Free recall takes a lot more effort because you're going to not have a cue that's going to remind you. You're just going to have to try to recall it on your own, which could be difficult. And versus cue recall is requiring less effort because you have that cue there to be able to remind you, such as a reminder on your phone even. Making a presentation, you'll have to think about whether you're going to have something that's going to help your audience remember, a cue in there for them to remember, or if they're going to have to use free recall and hopefully remember it on their own. The basis of the brain's digestion consists of memory, emotions, and motivation. Memory is what we think of past actions and use that imagery to create the appropriate action to avoid punishment or expect reward. Emotion is what state comes from experiencing this reward or punishment. And the third would be motivation. And motivation is the state of our bodies and ourselves that is going to determine whether we want to put through this hard work to see the outcome or not. People execute on 4 different intentions. These being effort, how much am I willing to work? Time delay, how long am I willing to wait? Risk, how much uncertainty is there here? And then also social aspects. What actions that I'm about to take, how is that going to be seen socially? Chapter 3, control what your audience remembers. Practical ways to avoid the hazards of random memory. How much does your audience really remember? A concept called the forgetting curve hypothesizes that we lose information over the time when we make no effort to retain it, losing 90% after a few days. Only a few days. If we don't take control on what our audience remembers, we won't be able to allow them to take home the necessary information that they came to the presentation for. In order to do this, there's a bunch of steps that I'll go over further. But the curve is exponential, and so this means that after the first session of hearing this information, you're going to lose most of it, the 90%, the following day, and then gradually more and more after that. Forgetting. Typically, audience forgetting things happens in one of 3 ways, or a few of them combined. The first being them just not paying attention in general. The second being them paying attention, but all their memories are going around in their head and they are not consolidated. And so this means it's just taking a lot longer for that information to get to them, and the possibility of it actually getting to them will not be as high just because they have so many other thoughts on their mind. And even if people remember, they might be missing the proper cues. So the third one would be they might just not have the cues in the presentation that will help them remember. And how do people remember? So there's two different concepts of the fuzzy trace theory. Yes, I said that right. Fuzzy trace theory. The first would be verbatim memories. So these memories are going to be the hard facts. So say you have a spelling test, you need to spell that word right. And doctors, they need to know the difference between different drugs. A lot of them have the same sounding syllables, but that could prove deadly if they give someone the wrong drug. So if you're a doctor, you definitely need to learn how to hold that verbatim memory in your head and keep it there for a long period of time. This verbatim memory is the naming of things. So you have to know the name. You can't just say in general, blah, blah, blah. Like, you can't just know the concept. You need to know the name of what you're talking about. And the second part of the fuzzy trace theory would be gist memory. And so, the gist of things. Exactly. So it's going to be the memory that's not the verbatim memory. Have you ever taken a test and gotten it back and you got a bad grade and you're like, wow, I thought I did so much better than that? It's because you probably actually knew the information, you just didn't know the names of the things that you had to know on the test. You needed to know more of the verbatim, but you just learned more of the gist, and you got the gist of it. And the reason why gist memories tend to last longer than verbatim is because people go in and out of paying attention every 12 to 18 seconds. This isn't to be confused with mind wandering that people do on their own and they just wander off in their mind. Everyone's done it. Also, on tests, some professors or teachers in high school will accept different amounts of verbatim or gist answers on tests. So if the student gets the answer mostly right, they got the gist of it, then they'll give them the points. Most teachers go doing only verbatim, a little bit of both gist and verbatim, or just gist. But most of the times it's a combination of both. Chapter 4, How Cues Pave the Way to Action. We create cues at point A so that they're noticeable at point B when people are supposed to realize and take action on them. For these cues to be useful, it's important that they're related in a sort of way. Whether it's the cheese in the dairy or anything else, when it's related, it'll help them remember it so much more. The brain is constantly searching for reward and adding something from if you're trying to start a new habit, add that habit to an already existing or old routine that you're already doing. And from this, that routine will just form into more of that habit, and that habit will just be integrated within this routine. Cues work on people's senses in an automatic way, whether it's color, size, loudness, brightness. A quick story on this would be a little girl that wanted to go get bananas. She was living in Poland, I believe, and they would ration things, so not everyone would be able to get all of what they wanted. So she heard that they had bananas, and she's like, wow, this is a twice a year occurrence. She ran to home, she grabbed her money and her bright pink, purple, yellow coat, and she ran back to the line. And once she got there, she was sitting in this line forever, and she just kept thinking, oh no, what if they say they're out with the person right in front of me? She's like, no, this cannot happen. And so the guy finally stands up. He's about to announce something, the banana guy, and he says, I will only serve to the girl in the bright pink coat. Wow, was she happy, but definitely felt bad for the person behind her. The reason that he chose her was not anything in his conscience. She probably didn't even think about it when she grabbed her normal jacket. But just because that color was bright and it stood out from other beige or other things, it really attracted the senses of his eyes in seeing that, and that was a point that everyone could see. And they used this without even knowing it. She gained, and he did it without even realizing it. Tying a new habit into an old existing routine is a form of habitual thinking, and when you think habitually, this is the same as doing it without, like, consciously. This is going to be something that you do every day. This is going to be something that you are used to doing and you're comfortable with. And when you engage in your audience's attention and you do it in a habitual way, you promote long-term memory because of a process called elaborated encoding. Another way to help your audience is to link your message to their important goals. This will give them the motivation to pay more attention, and they'll be so much more intrigued and take more from your presentation than they would have before. Tying it to an unfulfilled goal will also make it a lot better too, just because the brain is constantly seeking closure. And once they see this unfulfilled goal, they're probably going to hear you talking about it and say how great it is, and they're going to want to experience that reward as well. And yeah, this will help tend to pay attention to what makes them look good to others. So make sure when you're making your cue, make sure you tie it to their social desirability, because this will really help them power through and agree. And make sure they have enough willpower and motivation to listen to you. So what would help with this is probably presenting earlier in the morning and right after they've woken up after a few hours, just so they have enough energy to sit there and listen to you talk. And make sure you strengthen the association between cues, memories, and intentions to act. Chapter 5, The Paradox of Surprise. Why is surprise linked to action? Our audiences form expectations to predict the next outcome. When we set our audiences up to expect something and give that expectation to them in the end of what they formed in their mind to expect, this pleasures their mind, because the mind is seeking reward constantly. And this would be a reward because they are expecting it, and when they see that they expected the right thing, it'll pleasure their mind. How audiences form expectations? Well, they do this in a few ways. One would be automatically, unconsciously, so they're unknowingly remembering and forming these expectations in their head. Another way would be memories from past experiences. So maybe they're taking their own experience in their head and they're realizing, oh wait, I think I know what's gonna happen. Another way would be motivation, emotions, and through the beliefs that they form. All of this is going to motivate them to form these expectations in their head, forcing them to come up with some kind of conclusion. And most of the time when we give them this conclusion, they'll be satisfied. In order to help your audience form expectations, tie your content to their formed beliefs. Also, another way would help them to jog their memory would be providing them with how-to videos or just a resource that they could go back to and look at if they wanted to. Another thing that she mentioned in the book was that too much predictability could be a bad thing, and it could pose for too much going everywhere and forming expectations completely different than what the actual product in the end is going to come out to be. The elements of surprise is really something that they enjoy too. Getting a surprise in a good way is awesome, and it can pleasure their brain as well. In order to do this, during your presentation, make sure you give them something that they can predict along with a surprise along the way. Juxtapose is a concept that they brought up in this book, and it's comparing two things that are kind of unrelated, but they come out to mean something in the end. An example of this in the book was where he explained how an office that's not so well run could be like a light and shined on a wall in the daylight. And you can see the lights going in all different directions, and it's lighting up a bunch of different areas, and they all have goals. All these little lights are different people in the work environment, and they all have different goals, and they're all going in different ways. And the right way would be with a laser. And on the other hand, this laser, you can point it, goes straight, and all the light beams go in the same direction, and they're all heading towards the same goal. And this is what a typical office place should be like, and they all should be working towards the same goal instead of all going and doing different goals. They should all work together to complete their desired task. In order to keep your audience engaged and continuing them to create these expectations in your mind, you're going to have to step up your game, and every time you're just going to have to come up with something new and intriguing and surprising, because if they're getting the same boring presentation over and over again, I guarantee you they're going to get bored and they're not going to take as much out of the presentation. Whereas if your presentation is new and exciting and surprising, they'll definitely take more out of it rather than the opposite. Chapter 6, Sweet Anticipation. To begin this chapter, I just wanted to explain passive versus active thinking. So passive thinking is when you're thinking of things from the past and thinking about all the memories and taking on those and taking those past intentions and making your decisions then. And active thinking is when you're allowed to think of the future, and you're taking those memories from behind and creating that imagery in your brain to think about the possible outcome or what could happen in the future. And you're also able to make variations in your brain of all these different types of outcomes. One quote I wanted to read that came from the book is, "If we find the topic relevant and anticipate a good reward, we are motivated to linger with the text. The story turns the brain from passive to active by inviting to think about what comes next. When we become active, we also feel more connected to what we see, and this connection brings pleasure." So again, everything's coming back to this brain wanting the reward. It wants pleasure. We all want it. One tip that they gave me in the book was to use imagine in your presentations to open up active thinking for your audience. The word imagine will let them think about future instances. People will be more motivated with a boost of dopamine, and you can give them this boost of dopamine by making them anticipate what's to come next. When you're having them think about all of these next step instances, they're going to be a little uncertain, and this makes them uneasy, and it's also known to cause tension. We can handle tension if we know its degree, we are reminded of the importance of the final outcome, or we can finally tolerate the amount of delay until the outcome is realized. Making things memorable. So, while giving your presentation, if the delay behind the reward or the end is short, make sure you know that when you're giving your surprise or the ending, that you have it stated in the right words. Because if you have it in the wrong words, they might not remember this as much. This is because unusual instances or surprises or things that stand out are going to be what's most memorable within your presentation. People tend to remember the unusual things that happen the most because they're caught off guard, or they're just surprised. A tactic to do this with is called foreshadowing. So this is going to be giving a little bit of hints or details to your surprise or element factor that you want to reward them with in the end. Chapter 7, what makes a message repeatable? Techniques to help you make your message repeatable. As we create cues for people at point A, we hope that they pick them up at point B. In this case, we really need to make sure that they stick at point A. To do this, we need to use a few things to make sure our message is definitely, infinitely usable. So the first one would be portability. Is your message able to be used for a bunch of instances? Take Nike, for example. Just do it. You could just be doing anything. It's portable. You could just be doing your homework, just be going on a run, just do it, you know? Example of this would be the saying, the best is yet to come, versus the best is yet to come in the food industry. These are definitely different because the best is yet to come could be used portably in a bunch of different circumstances. But the best is yet to come in the food industry, that could only be put towards the food industry. So you have to make sure you choose your words wisely. Timeless appeal. A classic. You have to make sure that your message is not only portable, but it's also timeless, which means that it could be used throughout time and that it can continue to be used and make an impact on people way past your time. In order to do this, there is a few steps process that Richard J. Smith identifies. I'll read his checklist for you guys now. Number 1, the work must focus on matters of great importance, identifying fundamental human problems and providing some sort of guidance for them. Number 2, it must address these fundamental issues in a beautiful, moving, and memorable way, with stimulating and inviting images. Number 3, it must be complex, comprehensive, and profound, requiring careful and repeated study in order to yield its deepest secrets and wisdoms. One of the most important things I took from his list was the identifying fundamental human problems and providing some sort of guidance for them. An example of this would be Forrest Gump's quote from his mom, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. This is the inability to predict the future, which is the fundamental problem that he chose to make this quote from. Then you must also ask yourself, is this a cliche or is it a classic? One way you can make your statement a classic is simple syntax. Simple syntax leads to repeatable messages. Example, I forgave you as soon as I said hello. Related to, you had me at hello. You had me at hello is simple syntax because it has less words and it's not as complicated as the first one. Adapted coherence. Memory is adaptive. You take from the past and you take what memories you have and you want to put yourself in that place in your head with future ideas and your future intentions. But you put yourself in that place along with creating the ideas of what you're going to do in the future. Memory is motivated. We are motivated because of what we think about. When we think about ourselves going out and doing something, that makes us motivated to go and do it, actually. We retain from our experiences mostly the gist memory. We don't remember as much verbatim as much as we remember gist. For example, you may remember a childhood friend, but you forgot their name. That's okay, because that's normal. Most of our memories are gist memories. When your memory is consisted with a desired self, so you're actively thinking about what you want yourself to be like in the future, this memory will be a lot more easy to be remembered because you're motivated to do so. Also, it's important to remember that messages should be aspirational. So just like Walmart's, save money, live better. It's telling you exactly to do that, save money and live better. It's aspirational. Another tactic you could use is to take something that your audience is already saying, maybe change it a little bit or tweak it to your liking, but take their mantra, and a mantra is something that is building themselves up, and it's something that they're continuously saying. And so if they're continuously saying this, they'll remember you. Chapter 8, Become Memorable with Distinction. How to stay on people's minds long enough to spark effect. Distinctiveness is a very good tactic because it's important to have words or phrases that stand out and draw more attention, because they'll take longer rehearsal time looking at that certain area that's projected bigger than the other areas because it stands out. And this means that they'll remember that information more because that word is isolated or that phrase is isolated, and they'll use that almost as a cue to remember the gist of the memory as well. You must be careful with this while isolating items in your presentation as well, because remembering from before, people only normally take about 10% of the presentation information away. You want to make sure that the information that you isolated is the information that you want them to remember. You have to ask yourself 2 questions. How many items do you want to isolate? And do they represent the most important context that we want people to remember? These 2 questions are super important because they outline what guidelines that you should be looking for when you're isolating the certain important information while you're making your presentation. The more something differs from anything else, the larger the effect is going to be, and the more people are going to remember it. One way to create distinctiveness is to look at the opposite side of where you are and think about the view of what you're thinking about as the view of the other person or the audience. And this will really help you have both sides of the view and make sure both sides agree with what you're saying. Self-generated distinctiveness. This is when people themselves generate and have that opportunity to generate the distinctiveness on their own, and they choose what they want to remember because they are drawn to this and they make it distinct by themselves in their own minds. A quote from the book says, "It is easier to remember how you solved a problem rather than remembering someone else's solution." So this basically is enhancing what I just previously stated with the fact that letting people generate that distinctiveness on their own will allow them to remember it even more than if they're trying to figure out someone else's solution and how they got there. They should find their own in their own way. Another way to show distinctiveness is human contact or human touch. Patagonia's labels read, "Don't buy this jacket," because they're helping to lower the waste in this world, because there's so many other stores trying to compete with them and them with other stores that they're like, yo, we're making too much product. Don't buy this jacket. Written right on the tag on the inside. This will most likely make the customers want to buy their jacket because they're seeing that human or the person that created this tag on it really cares about the world and the environment that we live in so much as to say, don't buy this jacket on something that they are producing and selling. And this will really be inspirational to the customers. Chapter 9, the process and science of retrieving memories through stories. Memorable stories include 3 different categories of 6 different subtopics. So the 3 different categories would be perceptive, this is sensory details and context, actions across a timeline. So this is what's happening during the thought process. Cognitive, this is facts, abstract concepts and their meaning. Affective, this will be under the section of emotions. 1. Sensory impressions in context. This would be like, we saw this, we tasted this. 2, under the perspective column, would be actions across a timeline. Visualizing events happening. So you can see in your brain the future that's going to happen by taking those memories from the past, like I've stated before. Now onto the second column under cognitive. Under cognitive, we have facts, abstract concepts, and their meaning. Facts would be the certain things that you cannot change that you learned. They are cold, hard facts. Abstract concepts would be concepts that you created your mind from the information that you gained, and from that, you've learned something. Meaning is taking the lesson away from what you've learned in general. And then emotion, under the affective column, would be the emotions we felt while we're hearing the story. And taking away and the meaning of it is really important, because we will take that story and what we've learned from that story will now be added into our past memories. So we can take that and we can remember what happened there, and we can learn to not do it or do it in the past, depending on whether it came out with rewards or it came out with punishment. Concrete versus abstract. Opposites. If we can perceive it and think about it with our senses, that's concrete, that's facts. Then on the other hand, abstract, if we cannot and are unable to think about it in our head, it's considered abstract, something that we never thought about before. It's an abstract idea. These both must have a well-balanced setting of communication and give your audience different things so they're not going in and out. So you want to give them concrete and some abstract all together, because if they're going in and out, they will not focus. So you want to be able to not be too on one side or not be too on the other, but keep switching things up on them. Generic and specific, subsets of each other. Generic ideas are the general ideas, and they're more educated ideas. Specific ideas are less educated and probably need more of an explanation to as what they are. Now on to graphics and texts. So both have high potential at creating memory, but you have to make the text easy to read and pictures easy to look at. Pictures tend to be more memorable than texts. A quote from the book says, "A picture is memorable when it is easy to label, and a text is memorable when it's easy to picture." Make sure you're using abstract words and concrete photos to make sure your audience extracts the most from your presentation. To enhance your audience's memory, make sure to use visual metaphors, not previously used ones, or create your own would be the best option. Also, to enhance verbatim memory, you're also welcome to go over the same concept again, but in a variation of gist memory. So you can use the same verbatim, so the same core word, the thing that can't change, and you can describe it in a different way using different gist of it. And another thing is when you are using stories to create memory and you use personal stories, you're able to use more sensory details. So you're able to use we saw, I tasted, you tasted, or he tasted, we saw, we felt, we hurt, things like that. What is the audience feeling? Well, when you're moving towards rewards, they're feeling excited, ecstatic, ecstasy, love, pleasure, arousal, things like that. And when you move away from awards, there's feelings frustration, disbelief, sadness, anger, and maybe even rage. When you move away from punishment, they feel relief and liberation. When you move towards punishment, they feel scared, apprehensive, disgusted, fear, terror, unfairness, inequality, uncertainty, and social illusion. A quote in the book says, "One technique to help stay authentic is wabi-sabi, which represents a Japanese view of the world in which objects are seen as imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. Objects allow us to get close and to relate because they are not fully polished and predictable." An example of this is a vintage corner store in a picture that says even the most modern infrastructure will eventually be outdated. Chapter 10, How much content is too much? How to handle content sacrifice. We must clarify and realize what content is the most important for our audiences. A quote from the book is, "Less is not necessarily more if we aspire to memorable content." Again, with the verbatim and just memory, you have to remember what you want your audience to hear. You want your audience to remember and to take from your performance. Or a tip from the book tells us to remember to keep it brief with an audience that must relate with the content, because in this instance, they could be experts and they already know the gist of everything. They want to learn more. And so you necessarily don't have to go over all the little things that you might have to go over if you're talking to a different group. So this is basically just saying know your audiences, and it's the complete opposite. So if you have an audience that doesn't relate with what you're going to present on, make sure they have the information that they need. In this case, you might need a little bit more information, just because if they can't relate with it, they're definitely going to have more questions on it. Whereas with people who are more knowledgeable on the subject that you're presenting on, will not need as much content because they already know those little things that you need to describe to the other group. Another thing would be making sure to only use the time that's allotted for you. If you have 30 minutes to do a presentation, make sure you do it in that 30 minutes, because on the next chance, maybe they'll give you even more time to present. If you make it too long, they'll definitely notice that you're going over the time and they'll get annoyed by that and maybe not ask you to come back and present again. An example of this is walking out of the store. In the book, he said that he was walking out of the store, and when this store clerk, which normally when you talk with a store clerk, you're just basically saying, "Hi, how are you? How was your day?" And then once your bags are all packed up and ready to go, you're able to walk out the door and it's a quick transaction. Whereas when he was walking out to get his items checked out, this store clerk started up a story that he expected to take way longer than she had allotted the time for, which was 30 seconds. Which her story definitely lasted 30 seconds, which was awesome. And he said that we could all take a lot from this. She took 30 seconds to explain the dream she had last night, and that was it. He learned something, her dream, and it was interesting, and she didn't keep him there any much longer time than he needed. He was still out of there in the same amount of time as he would have been if he had the normal conversation that everybody normally has with the store clerk. There's also another example of an elevator with mirrors. So college students at a campus were really upset that the elevators were taking super long, and they were super slow elevators, and they were really confused why they couldn't make the elevators faster. Well, as they were in the process of making them faster, they decided to just put mirrors in the elevators instead. Putting mirrors in the elevators made them receive far less complaints than they did before. The mirror in the elevator distracts people and makes them think about something else rather than the super long elevator ride. So this is basically just saying if your presentation is super long, make sure that you have visible signs of progress throughout your presentation so people know that they're actually moving along and they're not just staying in the same place. Chapter 11, How Does the Brain Decide? The Science of Neurobiology and Neuroeconomics by Choice. How do we complete the cycle of perspective memory? 1. Design cues that are noticeable and link them to something rewarding. 2. Create a level of anticipation which releases dopamine and sparks attention. 3. Make important messages easy to repeat and to recall later. 4. Make sure the important information and content stands out. 5. Use effective storytelling with a combination of perseverance, cognitive, and affective components. 6. Offer an optional amount of information within your presentation. We make choices based on reflexes, habits, and goals. Habits are formed by doing, not by not doing. So make sure you put them in a positive way while you're making your presentation. People make decisions along this list. 1, they need to identify censored stimuli. So what is it? What's the cue? What do you need to do? 2, they'll select an action that will create a reward. What can you do that will bring you this censored stimuli that you want? 3 would be act on that intention. So the whole process will go through and you'll act on it. And then you'll evaluate what happened. Did you predict your outcome the correct way? Did you get that reward, or were you punished? And did you not complete what you intended to do? Our audience assigns values to different objects. These objects are bought by our audience because of different reasons, such as emotional, aesthetic, or sensational value. These values must be clarified for your audience in your presentation while you're explaining your product or whatever you're trying to do. Make sure you let them know what value that you give to this item. This is why a lot of people buy things. They buy them for a multitude of different reasons, because they like it, because it has an emotional connection to them, or because it's just connected to them in a way and they just feel the need to buy it. Any information you're sharing has the chance to be influential because if you're sharing this information, you never know what your audience is. You're trying to get them to take that 10% of what you're pushing for them to remember. But on the off chance they're doing the memory on their own and the distinct self-generated distinctiveness on their own, they could pick up anything that they so please in their brain. So make sure all of your information has the potential to lead to the influenced decision that you're trying to push them to make. Variables that impact people's ability to access this reward could be financial, physical, or mental. You may not have enough money to complete this. You may not have the mental capacity to take on another difficult task in your life at this moment, and you may not be physically capable of doing it. If you're trying to climb a bunch of mountains and you're 70, it might be difficult for you. You also have to remember that other things have impact in getting the reward as well, such as social aspirations and social impact, the delay in time that it takes to get this reward, the risk of getting this reward, and how you're going to get this reward as well. If your audience seems a bit confused or just isn't on sync with what you're trying to explain to them, try to use heuristics such as availability, familiarity, or authority to them. So make up a situation which they can relate to, and this will definitely help them come to the realization of what you're trying to give them and the information you're trying to make sure they come out. Fast action decision making is dependable on the environment that you're in and the social environment that you're in. It has to be good to be able to make a quick decision. If it's not, it may take you some more time to make this decision if you're uncertain on the factors within your decision. What's important is a good balance between feasibility and desirability. When you're making your presentation, make sure that you have enough desirability to make them want to do it and to help them in their transition with others, in transactions with others. And you also have to include feasibility, just so they know that they can do it too. They need to have that encouragement that will help them do it. Develop content that hooks into past rewards, but also provides sources for new rewards. Make sure you remember this checklist while making your next presentation. Context, cues, distinctiveness, emotion, facts, familiarity, motivation, novelty, quantity of information, relevance, repetition, self-generated content, sensory intensity, social aspects, and surprise. Memory is chasing rewards constantly. Make sure you make point A, your cue, most distinct so that you can make sure that your audience remembers to look for that cue or subconsciously look for that cue. Thank you guys for watching.